Hey Leo, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here. This is going to be a general love reading. So not every message will be for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. Leo, I have to be honest. The moment I connected with your energy, I immediately felt someone who can't seem to get you out of their head. It's almost like they keep trying to focus on everything else, but somehow their thoughts keep finding their way back to you. There's a lot happening beneath the surface here. So let's see what the cards want to reveal. Okay. Leo, the first thing I'm noticing here is how difficult it has become for this person to separate themselves from your energy. And honestly, I don't even think they expected this to happen. I don't think this was part of the plan. I don't think this was something they saw coming. Because as I look at the strength card sitting here, what I'm feeling isn't just attraction, it's impact. You know when someone walks into your life and somehow everything feels a little different afterward? That's the energy I'm picking up. This person remembers the way you carried yourself. They remember the way you spoke. They remember the confidence that seemed effortless, even when you weren't trying to impress anyone. And what's interesting is that I don't feel like Leo was chasing validation here. I actually feel the opposite. I feel someone who simply showed up as themselves, and somehow that authenticity became unforgettable. This person keeps revisiting moments in their mind. Small moments, the kind of moments most people would overlook. A conversation, a glance, something you said casually. The way you laughed at something that wasn't even important. It's strange because these memories seem to appear when they're least expecting them. They could be working, driving, scrolling through their phone, trying to focus on something completely unrelated. And suddenly there you are again. It's almost like their mind keeps finding its way back to you. And I have to be honest, Leo, I feel like they've been trying to stay rational about this. They've been trying to convince themselves that maybe it wasn't that deep. Maybe it was just attraction. Maybe it was just timing. Maybe it was just a passing connection. But every time they create a logical explanation, something inside them seems to challenge it. Because the Lover's card is showing up here, and the feeling surrounding this card is fascinating. It's almost like their heart and mind are having completely different conversations. Part of them wants to stay in control. Part of them wants to remain detached. But another part keeps wondering why your energy affected them so much. Why you specifically? Why not somebody else? Why does your name still cross their mind? Why does your presence still linger long after the interaction ended? And honestly, I think that's what they're struggling to understand. Because this connection feels like it bypassed their usual defenses. It reached somewhere deeper, somewhere they don't normally allow people to reach. And maybe that's why they're spending so much time thinking about it. Not because they have all the answers, but because they don't. Okay. As I'm sitting with this energy, I keep seeing somebody replaying conversations, almost like they're reviewing old footage, trying to figure out where things changed, trying to understand when these feelings became stronger than they intended. And what's interesting is that the more they analyze it, the more emotional they become, because the answer never seems to be one specific moment. It feels like 100 little moments, 100 small things that slowly built into something significant. And now we have the Six of Cups appearing. The atmosphere around this card feels incredibly nostalgic. I don't know if this person has old messages from you, old photos, old memories, or maybe just certain songs and places that remind them of you. But there is something here about reflection. There is something here about remembering. It's almost like they're looking backward while simultaneously trying to move forward. And that's not always easy, because memories have a way of bringing feelings back to the surface. Feelings people thought they had already organized and understood. Yet here they are again, and I keep hearing this phrase in my mind, I didn't realize how much they meant to me. Now, whether they've actually said those exact words or not, I can't say. But the energy feels very close to that. It's the realization that arrives later. The understanding that appears after distance creates perspective. Sometimes people only understand the significance of a connection when they have enough space to see it clearly, and I feel like this person has been spending a lot of time in that space lately. You know, for some of you, I don't even think they're talking about this openly. I think they're carrying these thoughts privately. Very privately. They may appear calm on the outside, composed, focused on their responsibilities, focused on everyday life. But beneath that surface, there's a lot happening. There are questions, there are emotions, there are realizations that seem to arrive when nobody else is around. And what's standing out to me the most is that this doesn't feel superficial. This doesn't feel like somebody simply admiring Leo from afar. It feels deeper than that. It feels like someone recognizing that your presence created a shift inside of them, a shift they weren't prepared for, a shift they may still be trying to understand. Because every time they think they've moved beyond it, another memory appears. Another reminder surfaces, another feeling quietly returns. And as I sit with these cards, Leo, I can't help but notice that this person seems to be approaching a moment where continuing to ignore these emotions may become more difficult than actually facing them. Because the more they reflect, the more they remember, the more they realize that whatever this connection is, it has left a much bigger imprint on their heart than they originally allowed themselves to admit. And I think that's exactly why this energy feels so quiet right now. Not because nothing is happening, not because the feelings disappeared, but because somebody is carrying far more than they're showing. You know, Leo, sometimes people go silent when they stop caring, but sometimes people go silent because they're trying to hold themselves together. And honestly, this feels much closer to the second situation. The hermit is sitting here and the feeling around it is incredibly private. I don't feel somebody who wants attention. I don't feel somebody who wants sympathy. I feel somebody who has stepped away from the noise because they're trying to hear their own thoughts for the first time in a long time. It's almost like life became too loud, too many opinions, too many responsibilities, too many expectations. And somewhere along the way, they lost touch with what they actually felt. Okay, I keep seeing somebody sitting alone. Not necessarily physically alone all the time, but emotionally alone. Going through things they haven't fully shared with anyone. There may be people around them every day, coworkers, friends, family. Yet somehow none of those people seem to know what's really happening beneath the surface. Because what I'm picking up here feels deeply internal. This isn't just about a connection. This isn't just about romance. This feels like someone questioning the direction of their life, questioning certain choices, questioning whether they've been honest with themselves. And I have to be honest. When people reach that point, they often pull back, not because they're running away, but because they need space to understand what they're running toward. The Four of Swords is showing up here, and the atmosphere around this card feels exhausted. Not dramatic exhaustion, not collapse, just the kind that builds over time, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. And I feel like this person has been carrying things nobody talks about, maybe responsibilities, maybe pressure, maybe expectations they've placed on themselves, or expectations placed on them by others. There's a heaviness here. A heaviness that existed long before Leo entered the picture. And that's important, because I don't feel like you created this burden. I feel like your presence simply made it impossible for them to ignore it anymore. You know, sometimes meeting the right person doesn't solve your problems. Sometimes it shines a light on all the places within yourself that still need attention. And that's what this feels like. Because every time they think about you, they're also confronted with themselves, with their fears, with their doubts, with the parts they've tried to avoid. And that isn't always comfortable. In fact, it can be terrifying, especially for someone who's used to staying busy, used to staying distracted, used to finding reasons not to sit still. Because when they finally do sit still, everything starts talking. The emotions, the regrets, the unanswered questions, the dreams they put on hold, the things they told themselves didn't matter. Suddenly, all of it becomes impossible to ignore. And that's where I feel this person's been spending a lot of time lately. Inside that space, inside that reflection, inside that uncomfortable honesty. The Nine of Swords is appearing now, and immediately I can feel the tension, I can feel the overthinking. I can feel somebody replaying scenarios in their head at hours when everyone else seems to be asleep. Not necessarily because they're looking for answers. Sometimes they're just looking for relief. They're trying to understand why certain thoughts keep returning, why certain emotions refuse to disappear, why certain memories still have power over them. And what stands out is that I don't feel somebody who enjoys feeling vulnerable. Quite the opposite. I feel somebody who normally likes having control, somebody who prefers certainty, somebody who likes knowing exactly where they stand. But emotions don't always work that way, especially when they're real, especially when they're connected to someone who genuinely affected them. Because the truth is, the more they try to organize these feelings into neat little boxes, the messier everything becomes. The heart doesn't always cooperate with logic, and that's frustrating them. They're trying to understand something that may not fit inside a simple explanation, and I think that's why they've become quieter than usual. Because they're processing, they're observing, they're trying to make sense of a chapter in their life that feels different from the chapters that came before it. There may even be moments where they question themselves, moments where they wonder if they're imagining things, if they're overreacting, if these emotions are really as significant as they seem. But every time they create distance, something pulls their attention back, not necessarily through action, not necessarily through communication. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a memory appearing unexpectedly, a thought arriving out of nowhere, a reminder they didn't ask for. And the strange thing is, I don't think they fully understand why these reminders carry so much weight. They're still figuring that part out. Because underneath everything I'm seeing here, underneath the pressure, underneath the stress, underneath the overthinking, there is a person who is slowly beginning to realize that certain connections change you, not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, in ways you don't always notice until you're standing in the middle of a completely different version of yourself. And that's what feels significant here. This person seems to be standing at the edge of a realization they haven't fully stepped into yet. Like they're beginning to see something more clearly than before. Not all at once, not in a single moment, but piece by piece, thought by thought, question by question. And the deeper they go into that process, the harder it becomes to pretend that everything inside them is still the same as it used to be. And maybe that's exactly what has been unsettling them. Not because they're losing themselves, but because they're starting to see themselves more clearly than they ever have before. Okay, as I sit with this energy, I can feel a shift happening. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but then it becomes impossible to ignore. Because the tower is standing here now, and honestly, Leo, this doesn't feel like one dramatic event. It feels like a series of realizations that have been building for a long time. One truth after another. One uncomfortable observation after another. One moment where they can no longer tell themselves the same story they've been telling for years. And I think that's what you've awakened inside of them. Not just feelings, awareness. Sometimes people meet someone and all they gain is a memory. Sometimes they meet someone and gain a mirror. And that's what this connection feels like. Because your presence seems to have reflected something back to them that they weren't expecting to see. Not who they pretended to be, not who they wanted everyone else to think they were, but who they actually were underneath it all. And I have to be honest, that kind of reflection can change everything. Because once you see something clearly, it's very difficult to unsee it. I keep picking up on somebody looking around their life and questioning things they used to accept without hesitation. Certain relationships, certain routines, certain environments, certain people they once believed would always be part of their future. And now there are cracks appearing. Not because those things suddenly changed, but because this person changed, or at least they're beginning to. There is this feeling of outgrowing something, maybe several things. And I think that realization has been emotional. Because growth sounds beautiful when people talk about it, but living through it is something else entirely. Living through it often means letting go of things that once felt familiar. And familiarity can be difficult to release, even when it no longer brings happiness. I keep hearing somebody ask themselves a question. What am I doing? Not in a judgmental way. Not in a hopeless way. Just in an honest way. Like they're standing in the middle of their own life and finally allowing themselves to examine it. And that examination seems to be reaching places they haven't visited in a very long time. Because death is appearing here now, and the energy surrounding this card feels deeply personal. I don't feel somebody becoming a different person overnight. I feel somebody shedding old layers. Layers they carried because they thought they had to. Old defenses, old beliefs, old coping mechanisms. Ways of surviving that made sense years ago but don't seem to fit anymore. And honestly, I think that's been confusing them. Because part of them knows they can't keep moving in the same direction. But another part is still learning how to trust what comes next. It's like standing in a doorway, one foot inside the old chapter, one foot reaching toward the new one, not fully belonging to either. And that's where this person seems to be right now, in between, in transition, trying to figure out who they are when they stop living according to fear, trying to figure out who they are when they stop making decisions based solely on comfort. And what's fascinating is that every road seems to lead back to the same realization. You, not because you solved everything, not because you're responsible for their transformation, but because meeting you appears to have started a conversation within them that never really ended. A conversation about authenticity, about happiness, about what they truly want from life. Because I don't think they're asking themselves whether they can keep living the way they've always lived. I think they're asking whether they even want to. And that's a very different question. Judgment is here now, and the atmosphere changes again. The energy becomes quieter, more serious, almost sacred in a way. Because this feels like somebody standing face to face with themselves. No distractions, no excuses, no convenient explanations, just honesty. The kind of honesty that arrives after you've spent enough time running from something. The kind of honesty that arrives when you finally get tired of repeating the same cycles. And I feel like this person is reaching that point. They're looking at certain patterns and realizing how long they've carried them. They're looking at certain fears and realizing how much power they've allowed those fears to have. They're looking at certain wounds and realizing they may have been making decisions from those wounds for years. And Leo, that realization alone can be life-changing, because awareness has a strange way of creating momentum. Once people recognize what's holding them back, they begin to see opportunities to move differently. Not perfectly, not all at once, but differently. And I think that's what is happening here. There is movement beneath the surface, internal movement, emotional movement, spiritual movement, the kind nobody else sees until much later. And the more this person reflects, the more they seem to understand that happiness may require choices they've been avoiding, conversations they've been postponing, truths they've been afraid to acknowledge. Because the version of them that is beginning to emerge feels less interested in appearances and more interested in authenticity, less interested in maintaining old structures and more interested in building something real. And as these cards settle in front of me, I can't help but feel that they're becoming increasingly aware of just how much of their life has been shaped by fear, and how different everything might feel if they finally started listening to something deeper than fear itself. And maybe that's what has been surprising them the most. The fact that the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to pretend they don't care. Because I don't feel someone trying to escape these feelings anymore. I feel someone getting tired of fighting them. Okay, there's a very different energy stepping into the room now. Not rushed, not reckless, just more intentional. Because the King of Wands is sitting here, and immediately I notice a shift in confidence. Not perfect confidence. Not the kind that arrives without hesitation, but the kind that develops after someone has spent enough time questioning everything. It's almost like this person is starting to recognize that constantly standing still isn't giving them the answers they hoped for. And I think that's important. Because for a while, reflection was necessary. Distance was necessary. Silence was necessary. But there comes a point where reflection begins turning into desire. The desire to know. The desire to understand. The desire to experience something directly instead of imagining it from afar. And honestly, Leo, that's what feels different now. I keep seeing somebody who has spent so much time watching, observing, thinking, wondering, trying to figure everything out internally. Yet every conclusion seems to bring them back to the same place, back to the same person, back to the same feeling, back to you. And I have to be honest. I don't think they like how much space you occupy in their thoughts. Not because it's unpleasant, but because it makes them feel vulnerable. Because once someone matters this much, avoiding the situation becomes increasingly difficult. I keep hearing somebody say, I need to know. Not I need guarantees, not I need certainty, just I need to know. And that's a very different energy. Because certainty tries to control the future. Curiosity is simply willing to take a step toward it. The King of Wands feels curious, determined, motivated, like somebody who's beginning to understand that they may never receive all the answers they want from thinking alone. Some answers require movement, some answers require action, some answers require courage. As I sit with this energy, I keep picking up on small scenarios. Somebody opening a message and closing it, writing something and deleting it, thinking about reaching out, thinking about what they would say if they did, thinking about how the conversation might unfold. And what's interesting is that the focus doesn't feel entirely romantic. Not at first, it feels personal. Like they genuinely miss the experience of being connected to you, your energy, your perspective, your presence. The way interactions with you seemed to bring something out of them they don't often show other people. Because not every connection creates comfort. Not every connection creates emotional safety. But I keep feeling that somewhere inside this situation, there was a sense of ease that they're having trouble finding elsewhere. And maybe that's why the pull keeps getting stronger. Because life has a way of showing people what matters when it's no longer right in front of them. 8 of Wands is appearing now. And honestly, the atmosphere changes again. Everything feels lighter, less trapped, less restricted. Almost like momentum has started building beneath the surface. I don't necessarily feel sudden action. I feel growing readiness. That's different. Readiness is what happens before action. Readiness is what happens when fear slowly begins losing its grip, when hesitation becomes harder to justify, when possibilities begin feeling more exciting than risks. And I think this person has been arriving at that place little by little. One realization at a time, one moment of clarity at a time, one honest conversation with themselves at a time. Because I don't feel somebody who wants to spend forever wondering, what if? That energy feels exhausting, especially after everything they've already been processing. especially after all the questions they've already been asking themselves. At some point, curiosity starts becoming stronger than avoidance, and I think they're getting closer to that emotional space. You know, there's something else standing out here. The future, not in a dramatic way, not wedding bells and grand declarations, nothing like that. It feels much simpler, which is why it feels real. I see somebody imagining ordinary things, conversations, shared experiences, time together, creating memories, learning things about one another they don't already know. And I think that's significant. Because when people start imagining ordinary moments, it often means they're no longer focused solely on fantasy. They're beginning to think practically. They're beginning to picture what a connection could actually feel like in everyday life. And that feels very different from the energy I was picking up earlier. Earlier there was confusion. Now there's curiosity. Earlier there was distance. Now there's movement. Page of Cups is here. And I have to smile because the energy surrounding this card feels surprisingly sincere. Not polished, not overly planned, not trying to impress anyone. Just genuine, like somebody wanting to open a door. Not kick it down, not force anything. Simply open it, to see what's possible, to see what's still there, to see whether the connection they keep thinking about feels the same when it exists in reality instead of memory. Because memory can only carry someone so far. Eventually, people want experiences. Eventually, people want truth. Eventually, people want to know if the feeling they've been carrying has a place to go. And as these cards settle together, I can't help but notice that this person seems far less interested in hiding from their emotions than they once were. The questions they're asking themselves are changing. The fears are changing. The priorities are changing. And somewhere inside all of that change, there appears to be a growing desire to stop observing life from a distance and start participating in it a little more fully than before. And maybe that's why this energy feels different from attraction, different from infatuation, different from the excitement that comes and goes. Because what I'm picking up now feels much more grounded than that. Okay, when the Ten of Pentacles appears here, the atmosphere changes again. Everything becomes quieter, more settled, more intentional. And honestly, Leo, what stands out isn't intensity, it's consistency. It's somebody beginning to ask themselves a very different set of questions. Not how do I feel? Not what does this mean? Not even what happens next. The questions feel more practical now. Questions about compatibility. Questions about stability. Questions about whether a connection can fit into real life. Because at some point, emotions alone stop being enough. People start thinking about where they're going, what they're building, who they want standing beside them while they're building it. And that's exactly what I keep sensing here. I don't feel somebody looking at you through a fantasy lens anymore. I feel somebody seeing you as a real person, a person with strengths, a person with flaws, a person with dreams, responsibilities, fears, and ambitions. And strangely enough, that seems to make the connection stronger rather than weaker, because reality has entered the picture, and reality hasn't scared them away. If anything, it seems to be making them pay closer attention. You know, I keep seeing somebody imagining everyday life, not dramatic scenes, not movie moments, simple things, conversations after a long day, sharing victories, supporting one another through setbacks, laughing about things nobody else would understand, building memories slowly instead of chasing constant excitement. And I think that's significant, because when somebody starts imagining ordinary moments with you, they're no longer just fascinated by the connection. They're beginning to consider its place in their future. And I have to be honest, that feels very different from where this story started. Because now I sense somebody asking themselves whether certain people are worth investing in emotionally, worth investing in energetically, worth investing in long term. And your energy keeps appearing in those reflections, not because they're forcing it, not because they're trying to convince themselves, but because every time they think about what matters most, somehow your presence remains part of the picture. The Four of Wands is appearing now, and immediately I feel warmth, comfort, a sense of belonging. Not perfection, just comfort. The kind that allows people to breathe. The kind that allows people to lower their guard. The kind that allows people to feel accepted without constantly performing or proving themselves. And I think that's one of the things this person associates with you. Because life has probably required them to wear different masks in different situations, to be one version of themselves here, another version there, always adapting, always adjusting, always trying to meet expectations. But around you, I don't feel that same pressure. I feel relief. I feel ease. I feel somebody who feels understood in ways they may not fully know how to explain. And honestly, that can be very powerful. Because people remember where they feel safe. People remember where they feel seen. People remember who allowed them to be themselves. And I think that's part of what's making this connection difficult to ignore. Because it isn't just about chemistry, it's about emotional comfort. It's about feeling at home in someone's energy. The King of Pentacles is stepping forward now, and I love this energy because it feels mature, steady, reliable, not rushed, not impulsive, not trying to prove anything, just grounded. And what I'm noticing is that this person seems to be becoming more aware of what truly has value in their life. Not temporary distractions, not fleeting excitement, real value, the kind that grows over time, the kind that deepens through consistency, the kind that survives difficult seasons. Because I don't think they're looking for something shallow anymore. At least that's not the energy I'm feeling. I think they're becoming increasingly aware that meaningful connections are rare. And when people encounter something meaningful, they eventually have to decide whether they're willing to nurture it, whether they're willing to protect it, whether they're willing to show up for it. And those thoughts appear to be circulating through this person's mind, much more than they would like to admit. There is something very beautiful happening here, not because everything is perfect, not because every obstacle has disappeared, but because perspective is changing. The way they view relationships is changing. The way they view themselves is changing. The way they view the future is changing. And as those perspectives evolve, so does their understanding of what truly matters. Because sometimes people spend years chasing things they believe will make them happy, only to realize later that what they were actually searching for was connection, authenticity, trust, partnership, someone who inspires them to become more of themselves rather than less. And Leo, as I sit with these cards, I can't help but notice that your energy seems deeply connected to those realizations, not as a destination, not as an answer to every question, but as a meaningful part of a future they're beginning to imagine more clearly than before. And the more they allow themselves to imagine that future, the more they seem to understand that some connections aren't memorable because they're dramatic. They're memorable because they quietly make you want to build something real. Okay, Leo, that's all I have for you for this reading. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with me. I genuinely appreciate your time, your energy, and your presence here. And as we close this reading, I just keep feeling that not every meaningful connection arrives to create noise. Some arrive quietly, some arrive unexpectedly, and somehow they leave a lasting mark on the heart. So be kind to yourself, trust your own path, and allow things to unfold one step at a time. Thank you again for being here. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll see you in the next reading. Take care, Leo.